Linux has just received a new feature that could completely change the way we think about desktop computing. For years, Linux has been known as the operating system for developers, programmers, and technology enthusiasts, but something is changing. A new generation of Linux desktop technology is making the experience faster, smarter, more flexible, and much closer to what people expect from a modern computer. This isn't simply about adding another application or changing the appearance of the desktop. The bigger story is that Linux is becoming an environment where the operating system can adapt to the way people actually use their computers. For decades, desktop computing has followed a familiar model. You turn on your computer, open applications, manage files, switch between windows, and manually configure the system. The operating system mostly waits for you to tell it what to do. But the future of computing is moving towards something different, where computers can understand context and automate repetitive tasks. This is where the latest developments in Linux become particularly interesting. Instead of simply responding to commands, the desktop can increasingly become an intelligent interface between the user and the machine. Linux has always had a unique advantage because it isn't controlled by a single company. Thousands of developers and organizations contribute to the ecosystem, allowing innovations to come from many different directions. Desktop environments such as GNOME and KDE can experiment with new interfaces. At the same time, projects involving Wayland, graphics, containers, virtualization, and artificial intelligence can transform what happens underneath the desktop. The result is an operating system that is becoming increasingly capable without losing the flexibility that made Linux famous. And this combination could become extremely important in the next generation of personal computing. One of the biggest changes happening across the Linux desktop ecosystem is the move toward a more modern graphical architecture. Technologies such as Wayland are gradually replacing older display server approaches. These technologies are designed around the requirements of modern hardware. They can provide better security, isolation, smoother graphics, improved high-resolution display support, and more reliable handling of modern input devices. For an average user, these technical changes may not sound exciting, but they can make a huge difference in the everyday experience of using a computer. Imagine opening your laptop and having applications launch smoothly. Imagine Windows moving without visual glitches and multiple monitors behaving consistently without complicated configuration. These improvements can turn Linux from something that feels experimental into something that feels polished. And that is exactly what Linux needs if it wants to attract millions of ordinary desktop users. But the transformation goes beyond graphics. Linux is also becoming increasingly interesting as a platform for artificial intelligence and intelligent computing. Linux already dominates servers, cloud computing, supercomputing, development environments, and much of the infrastructure powering modern AI. Many of the tools created for the AI revolution therefore have excellent Linux support. This opens the possibility of a desktop where AI isn't simply a website you open in a browser. Instead, intelligent tools could eventually become deeply integrated into the operating system itself. Think about searching for a file by describing what it contains instead of remembering its exact name. You could ask your computer to find a presentation containing a specific chart. You could summarize documents, organize information, generate code, automate repetitive tasks, or control parts of your workflow using natural language. The computer could become a much more active partner instead of simply being a collection of applications. Linux could have another major advantage here because of its flexibility and open-source ecosystem. Privacy-focused AI could potentially run directly on the user's computer instead of requiring every task to be sent to the cloud. Modern processors and graphics cards are becoming powerful enough to handle workloads that previously required remote servers. This could allow users to keep more personal information under their own control. That could fundamentally change the relationship between people and their computers. Your machine could become more than a collection of applications and files. It could become an intelligent personal computing environment that understands your workflow while giving you greater control over your information. And Linux is already built around the idea of user control. Another major reason Linux could benefit from this transformation is the growth of gaming on the platform. Gaming has historically been one of the biggest reasons people avoided switching away from Windows, but that situation has changed dramatically. Compatibility technologies such as Proton have made it possible to run many Windows games on Linux with surprisingly good performance. Graphics drivers have improved, hardware support has expanded, and handheld gaming devices have demonstrated that Linux can power a consumer-friendly gaming experience. If users can play their favorite games, browse the web, edit videos, communicate with friends, and perform everyday tasks without constantly thinking about the operating system, Linux becomes much more attractive. And there is another powerful advantage: customization. On many traditional desktop operating systems, users are expected to work within a specific design philosophy. Linux is different. You can choose a desktop environment that behaves almost exactly the way you want. Whether you prefer something minimalist, traditional, futuristic, touch-friendly, or completely keep that flexibility becomes even more important as computing moves toward new devices and interaction models. Laptops are changing, monitors are changing, and touchscreen and hybrid devices are becoming increasingly common. Handheld gaming computers and ARM-based machines are also expanding the definition of what a personal computer can be. Linux is already present across many of these categories. Its modular architecture makes it possible to adapt the software to very different types of hardware. This gives Linux an important advantage as the definition of the desktop continues to evolve. However, we shouldn't pretend that Linux has suddenly solved every desktop problem. Hardware compatibility can still vary. Some proprietary applications remain difficult to replace, and certain professional workflows still depend heavily on Windows or macOS software. Linux distributions can also differ considerably from one another. For experienced users, that freedom is a major advantage, but for newcomers, too many choices can sometimes make the platform feel confusing. The real change is that these limitations are becoming less overwhelming. Linux doesn't need to defeat Windows or macOS overnight. It simply needs to become good enough that people can choose it because they genuinely prefer it. And that is perhaps the most important part of the entire Linux desktop story. The future of desktop computing may not belong to one operating system. It may belong to systems that give users more control while simultaneously becoming easier and more intelligent to use. Linux has spent decades building the foundation for exactly that kind of future. What we are seeing now is the convergence of several powerful technologies: modern graphics architecture, better hardware support, powerful open-source applications, gaming compatibility, containers, virtualization, automation, and artificial intelligence are all developing together. Individually, each improvement might seem relatively small, but together, they could completely change what a Linux desktop feels like. The next generation of desktop computing won't necessarily be defined by a new start menu, a redesigned dock, or another visual theme. It will be defined by how naturally the computer works with the person sitting in front of it, and Linux is uniquely positioned to experiment with that future. The most exciting possibility is that the computer of tomorrow could become more personal, more intelligent, more private, and more customizable at the same time. That sounds almost impossible today. But Linux has always been about giving users the freedom to build and configure their computing experience. So when someone says that a new Linux feature could change everything, the important question isn't simply whether one feature will replace another operating system. The bigger question is whether Linux is becoming the platform where the next generation of desktop computing can actually be built. And if current developments continue moving in the same direction, the answer could be yes. The desktop revolution may not arrive with one dramatic announcement. It may happen quietly through hundreds of improvements that gradually change what users expect from their computers, and Linux could be at the center of that transformation. The future of desktop computing may already be taking shape, and Linux might be one of the biggest reasons why.